Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another Tuesday Cruiser Chat with OTRAMM. Same as usual, no real topics to discuss. I got some ideas from Instagram post, I guess yesterday, but then I wrote them all down and left them at work, so that's not super helpful. So yeah, no real topic tonight. And thanks, Dave. I am working on it. I think I'm down 20-something pounds. So yeah, working on it. After doing the 80 series suspension video and watching myself wheeze and huff and puff while I was putting the rear control arms in, I decided it was time to do something. So yeah, I went on a diet. Yeah, and it's working slowly, but it's working. But yeah, not a whole lot super exciting going on at the shop. Finally got the 80 series rear bumper ready to finish. We had a sweet 73 come in today. No, I'm losing the weight on purpose. It's not because of too much work. Yeah, I do a lot of work, but I definitely don't do too much. But yeah, I do enough that it feels like I'm doing enough. Dave wants to know, why does the power steering system suck so bad? Why does it leak so much? Because it's like 30 years old. Really, it's a bunch of hoses with clamps that are probably 30 years old on hoses of a similar age. And it's just that time for them to leak. Once you go through it and replace all the hoses and clamps, you're probably good to go for another 20 or 30 years. They also seem to leak because people like to put regular power steering fluid in them, not Dex 3. They seem to leak more with power steering fluid in them than the Dex 3 ATF that Toyota specs. At least that's what it seems like. It seems like the ones that come in with the clear fluid have more leaks than the ones that have been maintained with the red Dex. Yeah, have fun doing the low pressure hoses with 3/8. It'll fit, but man, the factory hose is, I think, 10 millimeter, so it's a hair bigger, and you can really tell that size difference when you're trying to get the 3/8 hose onto like the lower steel lines. I'm pretty sure it's 10 millimeter. And you wouldn't think it would make that big of a difference, but it is terrible trying to shove 3/8 transcooler line onto like the lower cooler lines. You can get it on there, but it's not fun. The one that goes to the bottom of the reservoir, I've never measured. I would guess it's closer to 12 or 14. I've always just bought that one from Toyota, rather than trying to find a hose that fit properly. And that one's not bad to change. When you change the high pressure pump, or the pump and the high pressure hose, it's fun because the banjo fitting on the high pressure hose threads into like a receiver block that's then threaded into the pump housing. And a lot of times when you crack the banjo loose, instead of it coming loose from that receiver block, the receiver block starts to unthread from the pump housing. And it just wants to twist and kink the line. So that can be a lot of fun. It's, I believe, a 24 millimeter low torque wrench that fits in there. It's either 22 or 24. I have one that I bought from Snap-on that's like half the thickness of a normal open-end wrench. And you can just slide that in between the high-pressure hose and the pump housing to hold the block that the banjo bolt goes into to keep it from spinning. A lot of times you get lucky and the banjo bolt comes out and no drama. But when it does get stuck, that half-thick wrench is super awesome. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, I did show you that wrench. Also, depending on which high-pressure line you got, the aftermarket ones seem to come with 2 like copper crush washers. It is a complete pain to try to get one of those washers on the banjo bolt through the high-pressure line, the other crush washer, and then into the pump. The Toyota gasket that goes there, it's 2 aluminum crush washers with a little bridge between them. So they kind of clamp onto the high pressure hose when you feed the banjo through. It makes it so much easier to put that hose on. So if you haven't got it already, get the Toyota high pressure line gasket. It makes it a ton easier. The Toyota high pressure hose also seems to hold up better than the aftermarket ones, even though it's ungodly expensive. But yeah, once you've got the high pressure line off and the supply hose that comes down from the reservoir, it's just 2 14mm nuts. 2 14mm nuts that hold the pump to the back of the timing cover. So that part's super easy to change. Except by the time you're that far, you've already glopped everything under there with power steering fluid. So it's going to be dripping all over you. So we'll usually like take all the lines loose and then kind of wipe everything down and then change the pump, just so you don't have power steering fluid dripping in your ear the whole time you're under there. It's not a difficult job, but it's not fun because the hoses are in tight confines and are going to be covered in oil. So you're like slipping and sliding and like jamming your knuckles into everything. If you take the battery out and maybe even the radiator and the shroud, it'll give you more room to work on the low pressure lines. I wouldn't try it. I don't think you're going to save enough to try to pump the fluid out. We like turkey baster as much as we can out of the reservoir first. And then just, clean up from there as needed. Need to see if the battery is dead on 100 series, only 6 months old, but if I don't start it like a week or so, it seems to lose all charge. I would check to see if you've got anything drawing on the system. Like a dome light that's staying on, a light inside the glove box staying on, a cell phone charger plugged into one of the power outlets, something like that that's draining the battery. Because yeah, it should stay longer than a week. If it was draining down, over a month or so, I'd say, you probably don't have parasitic draw. But in a week, I would think you either have a bad battery or parasitic draw. The newer vehicles, they've got more electronics that are staying on behind the scenes, but not enough that I would think it would draw down in a week. Because, we've got trucks that regularly sit out in the parking lot for a couple of weeks, and they still fire up. So I would probably take the battery in for testing, and if it tests out good, start looking for something that's stuck on drawing power. But yeah, like my wife's Prius kept going dead, and there was like a little dome light in the trunk, but the way we keep our grocery bags in there, the grocery bags blocked the lights. You never saw that it was on. If it's at 11.9 right now and you just drove for 20 minutes, you've probably got a bad battery, because it should be hanging out above 12 volts. I would think you'd have to have a pretty big draw to pull it down that quick. The other thing to just double check is, with the engine running, seeing what kind of voltage you're seeing at the battery. With the engine running, you're probably going to get like 13.5, 14.5 volts, somewhere in there. Just to double check that the new alternator is good and is charging. I had one guy tell me one day that new stands for never ever worked. So even though it's a new part, you've still got to verify it. Okay, so if you're at 13.5, 14, you're probably good. And thanks. You too could have a super awesome shirt like this too. I'll put the link down in the description. So yeah, based on the fact that it dropped that quick after driving, I would lean towards battery. The other thing you can do is like charge it up to, get it to where when you shut the vehicle off, it's at like 13 volts, and just see how long it holds that. If it drops rapidly, down to below 12, then you've definitely got a battery problem. Oh, and back up to Dave and the power steering hoses. If at all possible, I would do that in a garage with heat, because doing it with the hoses warm is going to make it way easier than dealing with the hoses in the cold. Never seen it at 13 volts when the engine is shut. Yeah, they won't hang out at 13 volts. It'll usually settle in somewhere in the mid 12s. And it should stay mid 12s, mid to low 12s. If it starts rapidly dropping off below that, you've definitely got an issue with the battery. And I guess you could also have a bad diode in the alternator, which would be letting juice flow backwards. It would let itself discharge through the battery. But I don't think you would have proper charging voltage if that was the case. So yeah, I guess it's a really long, rambling way to take the battery and have it checked, have it load tested, and then see what they say. Your wife is not going to be happy if you're putting power steering hoses in the dryer. Fuel filter on an 85 FJ60. It's super basic. It's 2 hose clamps. You undo the hose clamps, pop the hoses off the filter, and it just snaps into a little holder. Super easy to do. Just make sure you put the filter in right way around. They've usually got an arrow stamped into them for direction, so it obviously goes from the back of the truck towards the fuel pump. But yeah, it's super easy. Be gentle with the steel lines that are down there. There's probably 6 or 8 inches of rubber hose between the steel lines and the fuel filter. If the steel lines are crusty, jostling them around with too much vigor can break a marginal fuel line, and that's not fun. And while you're in there doing the filter, go ahead and get fuel line as well. You've already got to undo one end of the 2 fuel lines that are going to the filter. you might as well just get fuel line and replace the rubber soft lines while you're in there, because more than likely they're original to the truck. And good luck to Land Cruiser Life with the battery. 2000 LX470 have a slow drip of condensation coming from the cabin filter box running AC. Drain line is clear. Is the Toyota Fipig okay to use in place of the factory gasket on the bottom of the filter box? I don't see why it wouldn't be, but I would do more investigating to make sure that the drain line is clear. I had a 100 series in that looked like it had a clear AC drain line, but it was still backing condensate up into the cab. And it turned out where the drain hose goes through the firewall, it had run into some firewall insulation on the other side, and instead of going straight out, had crimped over. And it, everything looked good, but it was crimped just enough that the condensation wasn't draining, and it was running back in. Because if everything's working right, you shouldn't have an issue with condensation filling up enough to drain out of the filter box. Unless I'm completely missing something when I'm envisioning the box. But I'm pretty sure the split is up higher, like a good 3 or 4 inches up. Unless there's a window or a door down there that I'm not thinking of. It's been a while since I've had a 100 series filter box out. Trying to think. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank. Let me pull up a picture. That will make this easier. I forgot about them having the front cover on them. So yeah, yeah, I mean, you could probably use form and place gasket there, but I would still think if the drain is working properly, you shouldn't have liquid backing up that far. So I would check. So yeah, I would double check the drain line, because if condensation's coming that far back up, you've probably got another issue. And Dad wants to know if there are any interesting upcoming projects. We've got a whole rash of Japanese diesels coming in. We had an HJ73 come in today. I think we've got an HDJ81 coming in next week. So we've got those. Crash is just about done putting the 3FE together. So we can start stuffing that into the 40. I just need to grab the bell housing and flywheel for that from Schmuckster. Which possibly, if I run up to PA this weekend, I will try to get it from him then. I'm trying to think if anything else is the funds coming in. I think that's all we've got for fun and interesting. Most everything else is just general repair and maintenance. Looks like into December. I'll probably do a couple of FJ62 exhausts in the next couple of weeks for guys that have been waiting for those. But that's not super exciting. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, and we have a South American long wheelbase Bandeirante coming up sometime in the next couple of days. I'm not sure what we're doing to that one. But it's a guy that was down maybe Colombia for work, and he's moved back, so he's bringing that up. So we're giving it a once over when it comes in. So I guess we've got quite a few unusual cruisers coming in. I'm trying to think what else. And I just realized that I did not put the link to the super cool shirts in the description. So I'll have to go back and edit that later. But I was pretty excited when we finally got logo shirts. Yeah. Oh, and I wanted to, give a big thank you to everybody that has subscribed lately. It's kind of crazy how fast our subscriber numbers are ticking upwards. We were at like 1330 this morning, which is just kind of crazy. And also, super huge thank you to the folks that have kicked in on Patreon. I really appreciate the support for making the videos. Yes, I actually did sell the stainless one that was hanging out in the shop. It went to a guy down in Texas. Land Cruiser Life wants to know, what cruisers, if any, do you own? It's funny, nobody that works at the shop actually owns a cruiser. I've got a Subaru and a first-gen 4Runner, although my 4Runner has 80 series axles under it. So I guess partially I have a cruiser. Crash has got an Acura and a third-gen 4Runner. And Blue's got a Prius and a solid axle swap V8 Tacoma. So yeah, and I guess Crash and I both owned the same FJ60 back in the day. I owned it, and then Crash owned it. But it's been a while since I've actually had a cruiser. I need to pick up an 80 series. I need to find a cheap 80 series to build as a shop truck. Just haven't gotten around to it yet. Ideally, I want a 70 series. Or I'd love a 70 series. I want a 70 series four-door tray-back pickup, but that is way out of my price range. We've got the 73 in the shop that came in this afternoon, and I sent my wife a text picture of it. It just said Christmas. And all I got was a laughing face in response. So I don't think that's going to go well. Although if she really, really loved me, she would get me a 70 series. No worries. We're here till 7. That 80 series is not pristine. But I could be talked into that 80 series. Did you ever get it to start? I meant to ask you last night if the fusible link fixed it. I don't think it's cheap enough to be in my budget. I think you've got some Waterloo pricing on there. Well, see, the thing doesn't even start. That means it should be really cheap. Yeah, Crash and I have been discussing the need to build an 80 series for the shop, since neither of our actual wheeling trucks is likely to ever run again. I've been looking for a good mechanic, but I haven't found one yet. Oh, and for folks that don't actually know, Rob B that's commenting is my dad. And it took me a while to figure that out the first time he joined in on chat. No news on the race team leaving yet, which is good and bad. We hit a patch where I was doing a whole lot of fabrication and not a lot of maintenance and repair work, which put us behind in the budget because the bumper took me way longer than I anticipated to build. So yeah, I'd like to build up more of a cushion before the race team moves out and I take the rest of the shop. But yeah, they were down over the weekend, moving their cars around, getting them ready to take them to another race. But they didn't say anything about moving out early. But yeah, Crash and I go over there quite often and just dream about what we're gonna do with all the extra space. I'm ready to have more than 2 bays. You've got a half an hour still, bud. You do. I don't know how the dogs have figured out that when I'm on chat that it must be time for DINNER, because they're pacing behind me. Had a 95 FZJ for a year. Haven't checked the pesky heater hose. Any tips on changing it? So the way we do it, you take the splash shield off the driver's side fender. I usually take the starter out and the automatic transmission dipstick pipe, the top half of it, I take that out just to give me some more room to work. and then take a razor blade and cut through the pesky heater hose, like in the middle of it. So you go between the two pipes, cut that through, and then undo the hose at the top up at the heater valve. And there's a 12 millimeter bolt holding the top half of the pipe up behind the EGR valve. Take that 12 millimeter out. And then there's another 12 millimeter bolt that's down low on the back of the intake. Sometimes if you're super duper flexible, you can get up there and get that bolt out with an open end wrench. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to get in there. So it sounds terrible, but if you grab the top part of the pipe and just wiggle it back and forth rapidly, you can get that lower hose or the lower clamp to break. And then once that's broken, you can fish the whole pipe out, take one half of the pesky heater hose off, that came with the pipe, and take the other half loose of the head. It's just easier to undo that hose once the pipe's out and you're not struggling with that. And then we just, replace it with the constant tension hose clamps and a piece of silicone heater hose. It's like phh.com or 1fzphh.com. There's a guy that sells a kit for it, which is easier than trying to source all the bits by yourself. It's not a fun job, but it's not terrible. Dave wants to know, if I made a winch plate, would I run it between the front frame rails or outside? I would run it over top and underneath the bottom. It's been forever since I actually looked at where one would go. The ARB bumper, wraps three sides of the frame rails. So you catch the bottom tow hook bolts, and then you catch a vertical bolt, and I think two side bolts, the side bumper bolts. Oh, to like hide it behind the front bumper. I would, if I could get a winch to fit in there, I would run a plate side to side underneath the frame rails, so that I can catch the factory tow hook bolts. And go that route. You probably don't even really need to do any folding. Just run like a 3/8 plate, frame rail to frame rail underneath, and then you could weld on the fairlead bracket, or you could bend it in as well if you wanted to. And third gen 4Runner, check engine light and variable stability control light on. Codes are for engine communication circuit and evap emission system vent control. The vent control I've run across on a third gen, and I'm pretty sure it was one of the vent solenoids back at the charcoal canister. But there's like a whole procedure that you end up running through with applying air pressure here, applying it there, checking this vent and that vent to narrow it down. The factory scan tool will do an automated test that runs through and checks all the solenoids and the hoses for being blocked or leaking. Engine communication circuit, I've never run across something like that with that code description. So I don't know what to tell you there. If you had the actual codes, like the P0408 or whatever it would be, like P0420 for cat efficiency. If you had those actual codes, I could do some digging. But based off of just the descriptions, I'm not sure. Emissions, evaporative emissions codes are terrible to run down because it seems like a lot of time it's an intermittent problem. And if you can't get it to act up while you're running the active tests, it can be really hard to find them, without just randomly throwing parts at it. C1201. C is usually an ABS code or body code. Okay, yeah. So I did a quick code search because I can't get onto the actual information system from here at home. But it's calling out that 1201 as engine control system malfunction. And the notes say if it's combined with O2 sensor code, fix the O2 sensor code first. So I'm not sure. On a lot of the newer stuff, if you've got faults in other systems, it'll throw random communications codes that are kind of like a wild goose chase. They're only being thrown because another code in another system was thrown, and that threw communications out of whack. Like the Prius will throw an engine code that just says check hybrid battery system. There's nothing actually wrong with the engine system, but it's tripping the check engine light and setting that code to tell you to go look somewhere else. So that may be one of those, but I'm not sure. I've never run into that one. Any tips for R&Ring a 200 radiator? No, I thought Tim was getting you in this week for that one. So I guess not. I was wondering why I hadn't seen you on the schedule, because I thought you were getting in. I thought you were getting put on the schedule sooner than later. Anyway, sorry about that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's super difficult about it. I wonder why he said after the 17th, because I thought we could have squeezed you in sooner than that. But he's controlling the schedule, so he knows more about what's actually coming and going than I do. So maybe he thought he was going to overbook us. Anyway, if memory serves, it's really similar to doing the 80 series and the 100 series. So nothing super difficult. The pink coolant is not diluted, or it comes pre-mixed, so you don't mix it with water. So you need more pink coolant than you'd think you would, because you're not going to mix it. So that's the only super thing I can think of, is make sure you have enough pink on hand, because you can't usually find it at the parts store. Other than that, I'm trying to think. It's been a while since I've done a 200 radiator. I think I've only ever done one. But nothing's coming to mind as being difficult. I'm going brain dead. It's pretty straightforward. It's got the spring tension hose clamps. So it's helpful to have, a set of pliers to remove those. And I'm pretty sure I've got an extra set. So should you run into needing them, give me a holler, and you're welcome to borrow them. I just have to dig them up. Is there a way to do rear heater lines with hose instead of hard lines on an 80? I mean, I'm sure you could. I don't know how you would fasten them because they kind of they come along the floor and then kind of tuck up over the exhaust and then come up the trans tunnel and up behind the head. So it'd be hard to route them securely. And it's in a spot with a lot of heat and moving bits. So yeah, I don't think I would try doing them with hose. I also wouldn't try changing the hard lines out unless you've got the transmission removed or the head off. There's just not enough room to snake the hard lines out of the trans tunnel with the trans or the head in there. I'm trying to think. Yeah, the only time I've done it was with either the trans removed or the whole engine block removed. It's not particularly fun, but you're riding in the front anyway, so just block off the rear heat and tell the people in the back to wear extra socks. Yeah, it's funny. The time we do the heater hoses is when we're doing a rear main seal. If the lines are anywhere any little bit crusty, we go ahead and do the lines while the trans is out of the way. Most of them do. It's funny. I think it's the third gen Forerunners. Their heater lines are stainless, which I don't know why they didn't do that on the 80. Yeah, I hate dealing with the rear heater lines on those. You're fine. You've still got 17 minutes. You'll come see the people on the camera? Can you tell the people that you think it's dinner time? Can you tell them you think it's dinner time? Yeah, it's not. You have a couple minutes still. Look, you're on TV. The dogs want to be on cat too. was trying to look back and see what the suggestions were on Instagram for stuff to talk about when we ran out of stuff to talk about. Yeah, I do want to take a ride with the new suspension and see how that handles. Rear heater never blows cold. Guessing it's a clog since it's connected. I haven't seen an 80 series heater clog. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. Trying to think. I'm trying to think, from the last time I saw all your lines, they all look to be in good shape. So, I mean, I guess it could have sediment in there. But I haven't run into a blows cold 80 series rear heater. Or at least nobody's ever asked me to diagnose a cold blowing 80 series rear heater. So it may just be that not a ton of people use them or aren't that worried about them. But yeah, I've never actually had to diagnose it. And thanks for the thanks to Brady Adventures. Yeah, come up with questions and I will do my best to answer them. And Mike wants to know where the shop's located. It's in Bealton, Virginia, about an hour southwest of Washington, D.C. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it's nice because nobody bothers us. We're kind of maybe halfway between D.C. and Charlottesville. Nope, we don't have the other half of the shop yet. The other David just asked it earlier if there was any update on when we're moving in, and there's not. I talked to one of the guys from the race team last weekend, but they didn't say anything about their timeline for moving out. The lease is up in, I think, April. So that's when we most likely will be taking the other half. Hopefully we'll get more space before then, but April's kind of where I guess it'll happen. But I am ready. We need more space. It'll just be nice to be able to separate and do fab work and dirty work on one side and do clean mechanical work on the other. I haven't been to the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum yet. It is definitely on my bucket list places to go. I'm pretty sure my dad went a couple of weeks ago, but I have not been. And pros cons on Freon conversion on a 60 series. I'm guessing you're meaning swapping it from R12 over to R134A. The R134A cools differently. So you use less 134A than you would R12. And there's an old Toyota technical service bulletin that has all the new charge weights for swapping it over. I've got a copy of it at the shop. So if you end up changing to 134A, holler and I can get you the actual charge weight to do the change. R12 is getting so expensive and so hard to come by. We don't actually mess with it at the shop. We don't have an R12 machine. So if something's leaking or needs to be opened for service, we do the conversion to 134A because that's what the equipment we've got to fill with and the more economical way to do it. I don't know if it's still available, but there used to be some stuff called Freeze 12. It came in a can, and it was an R12 replacement that worked really similar to R12. And you could do it without actually going through the whole shebang of changing fittings and all that. And it worked really well. So if you can still find R12, that's also a viable alternative. Recommendations on stock height suspension setup with future additions of front and rear aftermarket bumpers. Stock so it can still fit in my parking garage. What series cruiser? That'll be a big difference in stock height. And do you guys rebuild engines? I've done a couple of 2Fs, and I've done teardown and reassembly of a 1FZ. We haven't done a 4.7. No real reason we haven't done a 4.7 other than we haven't had call to yet. But it's doable. We just haven't had to do it. And on an 80 series, I've been really happy with the stock height heavy Old Man Emu coils. I really like the way they ride. And David Hopewell, that's up higher in the list, he's got them on his truck, so he can chime in his opinion. But I like the stock height heavies. You'll probably get a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch lift just because the original stuff has sagged. But they feel real. They're nice. They're a little stiffer than factory, so they can be a bit jarring hitting speed bumps. But I like the way they handle on the road. But that's really the only stock height replacement spring set I've used, so I don't have much to compare them against. And back up to Brady Adventures, I'd have to look into it, but I know for the 1FZ, the straight 6 in the 80 series, you can still get a new Toyota short block. So you just rebuild your factory head, throw it on top of a new short block, and you're good to go. With new timing belt and all that jazz. So if a new 4.7 short block's available, that would be the super easy way of doing an engine rebuild. That would be labor-wise, it's probably going to be pretty expensive. I want to say I looked it up before, and the R&I time to remove and replace an 100 series engine was something like 30 hours. So, it's gonna likely cost an arm and a leg in labor and parts to build it. So I don't know if that would outweigh the lower price of a high mileage super clean 100. You'd also have to look at the steering rack, the front differential, the CVs, stuff like that tends to wear. We're not seeing a bunch of them yet, but we've started seeing a couple 100 series with super worn slip joints in the drive shafts, bad enough that they're clunking. Things like that will add up and nickel and dime you on top of the super expensive engine swap. I haven't seen any 4.7s clapped out due to mileage, and we've got a customer with 400K on his. You randomly see them pop up on Craigslist every now and then for having dead cylinders. And I can only assume that was just a complete lack of maintenance. or a severe overheat. So I've heard stories of it, but I've never actually seen it in person. Sorry, trying to finagle parts delivery from the infamous Schmuckster. When you can't find 40 parts or 60 parts anywhere else, Schmuckster has them in his garage. Yeah. Like I had somebody call me about wanting to buy an 80 series with a bad rod knock, you know, and it was cheap, but it wouldn't be cheap, by the time you put the, probably $8,000 in doing the engine, plus probably several grand in catch-up maintenance. That truck got real expensive real quick. It looked like a great deal, but by the time you added up, everything it was going to need, it got super expensive. If you're doing all the labor, in your home garage or, a buddy's shop or something like that, then buying vehicles with issues to save money, can be great. But when you're paying somebody to do all the labor, it gets expensive quick. $8,000, it would be, and it's ballpark, but new Toyota factory short block. So yeah, it'd be all OE Toyota parts. So new Toyota short block, new timing chain set, new oil pump cover, new water pump, rebuild the factory head, and then the labor to put everything together, take it out of the truck, put it back in, and all that jazz. It gets really expensive really quick, and if memory serves, it's somewhere between $8,000 and $9,000. I guess it's mostly OE Toyota parts. We would use an ASIN for the timing cover, oil pump, which is what Toyota used, just doesn't have Toyota stamped on it, and like an ASIN water pump. But yeah, pretty much everything else, all the gaskets, all the seals, the short block, all that jazz would be factory Toyota. And that's assuming no insane head work. That's assuming all the valves are still good, that it doesn't need a valve grind, that it just needs to be decked and put back together. Yeah, it gets expensive quick. Even doing like an old 2F in a 60, if you use all Toyota parts, it easily gets up into like the $6,000 range. And I'm sure there's ways you could do it more on the cheap side. But, trying to keep it as factory as possible and as reliable as possible, it gets expensive. I like the idea of the factory short block over getting the existing block machined, because it seems like machine shops are a dying art, and finding one that will machine to Toyota's specs is few and far between. Oh, and don't just get a Jasper. Although we had a reman engine come in for an 80. I think I can't think of who the name was. It was an aftermarket builder But it was, I guess, who Toyota uses, and it had all Toyota parts on it. It was a really nice looking rebuild, and I can't remember the name of it. Sweet. I'm not even sure what manual transmission goes behind the 4.5. We never got those here. Well, at least here stateside, there's not a lot for aftermarket engine mods for the 4.5. You know, there's a guy that makes stroker crankshafts and pistons and camshafts, but they are insanely expensive. And I don't have any actual knowledge of using them. You used to be able to get the supercharger, and then there's a couple of guys working on turbocharger kits. When Joey comes out with the turbocharger kit, that will be awesome. And I know there's a bunch of guys in Australia that build them. But commonly available, yeah, here we don't get a lot of aftermarket for the 4.5. I've seen crazy videos of guys turbocharging them out of the Middle East. And it's insane the power they're getting. But yeah, we don't. It doesn't seem to get over here. And thank you for watching the videos. I'm glad they're helping people. Yeah, we got the 4.7. And the 4.7's nice. A supercharged 4.7 is nicer. And then the 5.7 is nicer still. But I really like the just keeps on chugging along reliability of the 4.5. And they're quite fun once you supercharge them. So I can only imagine how much fun it'll be with the turbo kit. But yeah, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna jump off of here so I can fix dinner and get the dogs fed. They're patiently waiting behind me for their dinner time. I just went brain dead. But yeah, I'm gonna jump off of here and go feed myself and feed the dogs. But thanks to everybody that tuned in. Thanks for everybody that subscribed. And if you haven't already, check out our Patreon link down in the description below. And yes, the 4.7 was the only gas motor in the cruisers from 98 to 2007. Yeah, we didn't get any of the cool diesel stuff. So yeah, I'll catch you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in.